Okay, so in part one, we did all the parenting and childing and grandparenting we needed to do to make this pirate animatable as an object. And so now what we need to do is we need to do a couple things. First, we're going to create a composition that this pirate will be dancing in or in front of. And to do that, we're going to import another asset. The other asset that we have is the brown pirate ship on water, body of water JPEG. And we're just going to leave that as footage and click open. All right, and so we've got this image. And then what we want to do is we want to create a composition that will allow us to put this in here and then place the pirate on top of it. And so to do that, we can just go to, we can right click, and in this window, we can say new composition, or we can say file, new, nope, it's not up there. Sorry, we can go to composition at the top of the window and say new composition, or just hit Command or Control N. All right, and so I'm going to make this full HD, right, 1920 by 1080, and I'm just going to call it pirate backdrop. Okay, so I've created this. Now, my composition settings were set to have a red background. If yours is black, that's totally fine. If you want to change it, you can just select the have the composition selected in your project pane and go to right-click on it and go to composition settings. And then you can adjust the color here. You could rename it, resize it, make it longer, shorter, whatever. I'm going to leave it red for the time being. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my brown pirate ship on the water JPEG. I'm just going to click and I'm going to drag it down here into my timeline. And you'll see that this image is much smaller. I am going to scale it up, and that's going to make the resolution look kind of crappy, but this is, meant to be a high quality, thing. So, so we're just going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and use the selection tool rather than the rotate tool, just in case it decides to rotate this. I'm going to hold down Shift and click and drag, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill this frame up, right? And you'll see that, yeah, it's a little pixelated now, but with the for our purposes, that's fine. Okay, so we've got the boat in there, so let's go ahead and drag a pirate in here. And so we're actually going to use this pirate composition, right? We've got our pirate layers, but what we want is we want to take this whole composition and we want to drag this down. We want to make sure it is the first thing in the list. And you'll see that now we have a pirate who actually looks like he's sitting on the boat, and he's a giant. But so we have this pirate that you'll notice is in the scene. Now there's a couple things I want you to pay attention to. First, the toe of his boot is being cut off. And second, a little bit of the top of his hat is being cut off too. And that's because in After Effects, if you have a composition and and part of your layer goes outside that composition, it will trim off the composition wherever the edges of the composition are. So what we need to do is we need to select the pirate composition. We need to right click and we need to go to composition settings. But before we do that, let's go ahead and bring the pirate composition up in this window. And to do that, we could either double click on it and then we would likely have two tabs up here, two composition tabs up here. Or we can just come down here and you'll see that we now have two tabs because we have two compositions here. So we have two timeline tabs. I'm just going to click on the pirate tab and you'll see, right, his foot's cut off and this image is a little bit small. So let's go ahead and make this composition bigger so that we don't ever have him getting cut off by the composition. So we have the composition selected here. We can right click and we can say composition settings, and let's go ahead and make this bigger, right? It's significantly smaller than the frame. We could make it the same size as the window, but really the big thing is we just want to make it big enough so that he has plenty of room to move around. So I'm going to start by just making it 1500 by, sure, 2500 pixels, or 2015 pixels, right? The aspect ratio was locked. It doesn't really matter, but I just made the width 1500. So now there's plenty of height as well. I'm going to hit OK. And so now if I go back to this other composition, right, his toe is not cut off and his hat's not cut off. Now, something you'll note is when I'm working in, right, if I do this in separate compositions where I don't have this, the pirate ship in the background, then, right, I won't be able to see the pirate ship when I'm doing the animation. And in our case, we're just trying to learn how to animate this. We could also bring this pirate ship into our pirate composition. So if we wanted him to be dancing on the ship or using it in some way as a prop, we could do that. In our case, we're just going to focus on making him make some silly motions over time, and then bringing in multiple copies of this pirate into our scene so that they're dancing everywhere. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to our pirate composition timeline, and let's start animating this pirate doing something. So I'm going to start by using my rotate tool, and I'm just going to set everything more or less back to a default setting, right, where his legs are more or less in the same position. His arms are probably fine where they are. And oops, I didn't want to rotate him. Use letter V to move him. And I just want to make sure he's somewhat centered so there's plenty of space. And so let's go ahead and get started. Right now, some of the things that we need to think about is, how does this pirate move, and how do we move his torso much? If we want him to squat down and jump up, how does that work? What way? How do we do all of these different things? And so first, what we should do first is we want to select every single one of these layers. So I have the torso selected. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to click on right foot in the timeline. So all of these are selected. And then I know that I'm going to be manipulating the position and keyframing the position and the rotation of these different objects. Predominantly the rotation. The only time I'm going to be dealing with position is really for the torso. Right? Unless I want his arms to like come off or something like that in the middle of this animation. And so I'm going to press the letter R on the keyboard, right? So the rotation for all of these layers comes up, and I'm just going to I'm going to click on the stopwatch for one of them. And when I do that, it's going to set keyframes for the rotation position of every single object in there, right? And then I'm going to hit the letter R again, and that's going to hide all those rotation keyframes for the time being. Then what I'm going to do is I know that the only thing I really want to control the position on is the torso. So I'm going to select the torso, hit the letter P, and just turn on the keyframes for the torso, the position keyframes. And then if I select all the layers again, and I hit the letter U, right, what it's going to do is it'll show me the rotation keyframes for everything and the position keyframes for the torso. Right, so I have all of that up if I need to. If I can't see everything, I can always, right, pull this up to make my window a little bit smaller and see these different layers. I'm not really going to need to see all the keyframes. I just want to be able to make sure that, that we start to do this. So to start with, I'm going to start by animating his arms. And so the way that keyframing works best is to start with a default, like your starting position, and then the reason they call them keyframes is because you're essentially saying this is a key moment, right? And so it's best to start with one end of motion and then go to the other peak of that motion. And so I'm going to go ahead and move my playhead forward about a second, right? It doesn't matter if I'm exactly at a second or not. I'm going to move my playhead forward a second, and I'm going to focus on his arms. And before I do that, I'm going to deselect all these layers in here. And to do that, I can just click off in the background here somewhere. And I'm going to start by doing his arms. So, and this is going to be the peak of the motion, right? So what I want is I want his arms to go like up above his head. So I'm going to select his upper arm, and I'm just going to rotate this, you know, pretty pretty far up. He looks like he's broken his arm. I'm going to grab this other arm, I'm going to rotate this all the way up. And then I'm also going to adjust the rotation of his hands and forearms, right? So these are all going to be fully extended, right? So there he is. He's got his arms at full rotation, right? And so now I can scrub back and forth on my playhead, and if I scrub slowly enough, right, we're going to get that motion there. Now, something that's kind of annoying is if I, play this, I have to hit stop and play again to watch it loop through this, right? And his arm's going up, right? This is a very slow arm raise, right? I mean, maybe he's just like getting started, getting ready for the bass to drop or something like that. Okay, but one of the things that I want to do is right now, this is going to play through my entire timeline every time if I don't stop it. And what I want to do is I only want to be focused on working in one section. So I want to adjust the length of the work area. And the work area is controlled by this big gray bar with these two little blue things on the end. So I'm going to take the end of my work area and I'm going to click and drag until I'm somewhere maybe in the range of 2.5 seconds or 3 seconds or something like that, right? So now, right, I can watch this motion go, and then I can make these adjustments. Okay, so something else to note, right? We can see that these are the keyframes that are currently that I've set, right? We didn't set anything on the thighs at all or legs. But we do have his arms set. And so you may have noticed that, right, as I said, this is a very slow upward lift. So what we want to do is, let's say if we want this to go faster, what we can do is we can click in the gray area here and drag. And you'll see that I'm selecting all of these points. And then I can click and drag to slide these closer to that first keyframe or further away, right? The closer it is, the faster this motion is going to happen, right? So so now his arms go up, right, significantly faster than they did before. And this is actually, probably a lot better. If I want them to go up really fast, right, I can just slide these over until they, land on the playhead here, and right, his arms go up very, very quickly. So let's make his arms go up quickly. I'm not sure how many frames I'm at. And at this point, I could probably zoom in as well. Right? I don't need to see my entire timeline. I just need to see really the work area, so I have a little bit more resolution here. Okay, so his arms are coming up. And so now we need to go ahead and figure out what the next motion is. I think I'm going to go ahead and you could do really whatever you want with his arms, but I want to go ahead and animate his arms a little bit further, and then we'll do some leg animations. And so I'm going to go ahead and click off, so I'm not selecting anything. I'm going to click on his upper arm here, and I'm going to bring this one out straight, but I'm going to leave his forearm up and his hand rotated like that for now. I have no idea what I'm doing. But so you can watch that motion there now. And then with this arm straight, he's going to flatten this out a little bit. But also rotate this arm up a touch. Okay, so now if I run this. Now, something to note, right, and actually I really want his hand to kind of snap there at the end too, so it's going to snap down. There we go. That's a nice little slap. All right, so what is he going to do with his other arm at the same time? Now, something else is, right, if he's dancing, ideally these motions are, these keyframes for all of his body parts should be aligned, right? Because unless he has really bad rhythm, they should be happening at the same time, right? And so with this arm, maybe he's actually just going to rotate his arm up there and rotate his hand like that for this one. And then for this next shot, maybe what he does is he rotates his elbow all the way down and just, you know, slaps the side of his leg. Right, so if we go through this now, right, so he's got his, right, so now he's got some arm motion happening. And we've got a pretty complex set of things here. Now, let's say we want this to go faster or slower, but we want it, we like the timing, we just want all the timing to be faster or slower. To do that, what we can do is we hold down, we click off in the gray somewhere on any of these layers. And I'm going to do it here so we're just focused on the right rotation and position of these of the arms. And what we do is we hold down Option and we click and drag. And what that does is it proportionally either lengthens or proportionally shrinks the time between these keyframes. Right? So if I want this all to be ridiculously fast, right, there he goes. And I can shorten my work area so I can actually see this a little bit better. There we go. All right, so there's his little flat arm flaps. All right, so he's flapping his arms a little bit. Great. And so let's go ahead and start controlling maybe the position of the torso and his legs. So let's say as he's doing this, he's squatting down to jump. And so the first thing we're going to want to do is you know, figure out remember about where his feet are, right? Ideally, we would be able to lock his feet in place. One thing we could do is this is one of the times when we could use a shape layer, or we could even create a guide, which we haven't talked about yet. But if we go ahead and click on this show grid, right? Now we've got this grid overlaid, which can help us substantially in terms of making sure things go back where they started, right? So I can see, right, this toe is, you know, 2 units above this green line, and this toe is basically half a unit above that green line. So I can go ahead and if I select the torso, and I use the move tool, not the rotate tool, right? But if I use the move tool and I pull the torso down a little bit, oh, sorry. I don't want his torso down on the first frame, right? I actually want him to reach a full squat right about here, right? Which you'll see these are highlighted in blue, which means that I am on those keyframes. And so now I can go down to maybe here for the full squat. And I can go ahead and use the rotate tool, or the W on the keyboard. And I can rotate his legs up and rotate his knees in. Right? And I can do the same thing with his other leg. And I'm not really close to where his feet should be right now. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this a little bit. I'm pretty sure his foot was, oops, his toe was somewhere in there. I mean, obviously this is going to be totally and completely ridiculous. But let's go ahead and see what this looks like while we've got it set. So, right, so it's because the torso is his, right, full body, the arms are flapping, and I can animate those independently of the rest of the motion, right? So I'm going to pause that, and I'm going to go ahead and, let's see here, and go ahead and bring him. I want him to come back up to this standing position, right? His feet do move a little bit, you know, and I can say, oh, he's actually lower than he was when he started. So maybe what I do is I go to the first frame and I actually just, oops, undo that. I use the move tool, the letter V on the keyboard, and I just pull his feet down, pull him down just a hair, so that when he goes, you know, his toes still go a little bit further than they should in here. And so this is a time when what I might want to do is do the next keyframe, right? So we're trying to do these key things, and the computer tries to figure out where we want stuff to go, but we don't want his feet to spread out that much and go that far down in the midst of this action. We want his feet to stay about at the same level. So if I go halfway between these two keyframes, then what I can do is I can use the rotate tool to bring his feet in just a little bit and up just a little bit. And so that then when I come back here, right, you can see his toes dip a little bit, but they come back up and come back up and out. So maybe I just need one more keyframe to bring his toes a little bit closer together in here. So his feet slide together, right, but he stays at about the same length, about the same height, right? Okay. And this is the magic of keyframing. And so now what we need is for him to stand back up. And to have him stand back up, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to select the start keyframe for the position of the torso. So I've clicked on that to select it. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control C to copy it. Then I'm going to move my playhead to where I want him to be when he's standing all the way up again. And I'm going to go ahead and make it this last frame here. I'm going to go ahead and hit V to paste it. And so you'll see, right, now his body is right up in the air with this crazy like sort of jump thing, unfortunate jumping thing that he's doing, right? But so he's back up to where he was before. And right, it's just taking the value of this keyframe and copying and pasting it. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to have, right, his legs essentially do the opposite motions that they did, so that they end up where they were before. So I'm not going to select this keyframe. I'm not going to select this final motion, this final point of position. But what I am going to do is I'm going to select those other three keyframes that I set. So I'm just going to click in the gray here. I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to select those three keyframes. I'm going to copy them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, so I'm going to go to this last keyframe. I'm going to paste them. And you'll notice that there's some weirdness going on there. Although if I was just doing this as a project, I'd be like, oh, that's perfect. I don't need to worry about this at all. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on those keyframes, and there's several different things that happen here, right? First, it tells me what the value is. I can edit the value here. There's a lot of other options for what we can do, and we'll talk about keyframe interpolation and stuff later. But under Keyframe Assistant, I can go to Time Reverse Keyframes. And when I do that, it flips the order of those keyframes around, right? And so now I can click these keyframes, I can drag them over, and I can make sure that the last one aligns with the first one. And maybe, and so you'll see that I did make a mistake here, but it's a mistake I'm really happy with. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it, but I want to tell you what mistake I made, right? I selected the keyframes, but only for the foot, right? So the thigh keyframe here, if I want this to be, correct, what I should do is on the thigh rotation keyframe, I should copy it. I should bring this over, align it with these other keyframes, and hit paste, right? And then, right, his leg will move the way that it initially did. And I almost like this even better, where he just comes back up on one leg. So I don't even know. I'm really happy with that animation. So I'm going to leave him doing whatever it is he's doing. One thing I might change now that I've got this ridiculous motion happening is I might pause it, and on this final frame, I'm going to use the rotation tools. I'm actually going to make it so his hand slaps his knee, because then it just makes the world so much better. And so I might actually bring this down a little bit here, straighten his arm out a touch, and see what this looks like. Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about, right? So so we've got him animated, right? He's dancing. And notice that, right, he's completely in frame the whole time. And so let's go ahead and go back to let's save our work. Let's go back to our other composition and just see what this looks like with this backdrop on here, right? And so now, right, it plays through once and then it stops, right? Because it's not repeating. And that our timeline is 30 seconds long. And so let's go back to our pirate layer and let's just say, this is, what we want. This is all we want playing, is this little few frames. And so I'm going to pause this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and come to the end of my work area. I'm going to notice, look at what the frame count is, right? It's 17 frames. That's all that I have on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to composition at the top of the screen. I'm going to go down to composition settings. I could also hit Command K on the keyboard in order to do this, or Control K if you're in Windows. And my duration, which is probably hard to see in YouTube, but my duration is set to 30 seconds. I only want it to be 17 frames. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 0, and I'm going to just make this a 17. I'm going to hit OK. Now when I do that, this is the entirety of my timeline. And so what's going to happen is this will play back quickly, but I'm also going to, he's going to disappear off the screen in this one, right? So you can see, right, this timeline is only the pirate composition is really short, and then he disappears. Okay, so now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to be able to essentially repeat this clip over and over again to have him continue doing this move. Now, the other thing is we could create several compositions that are different dance moves that we could then assemble in some sort of different order. Because this is a tutorial and I don't want it to be too long, we are going to keep it to one dance move, and that's all he knows. And so let's go ahead and save this here. This is a good point to save. Okay, so now what we need to do is we want this little dance move to loop. Now, one way that we can do it is we could copy this layer, right? I could copy and paste this composition. I could drag this over and offset it, right? And then I've got two loops, and I could drag it over, offset it, etc. That takes forever, and it's also just a pain in the butt, and it fills up your entire. If I had enough of these little loops to do this whole thing, it would be, right, I'd probably need my own composition for the dancing loop. We're going to do something that speeds that process up. So I'm going to undo those steps so I just have this clip here. And what I'm going to do is we're going to do something called time remapping, which we haven't discussed at all yet. I'm just going to show you how to do this one thing with it right now. And we're also going to introduce something called expressions. Expressions are ways that you can actually code motion and animation for your objects rather than manually manipulating them and moving them around. And we're gonna do like the simplest expression of all time. And we're not in this class going to be able to get into depth in expressions. We'll look at a couple of things where we make a few changes, but if you don't have any experience writing software at all, then expressions don't really make a lot of sense, and it's not something we can really cover. So So let's go ahead and do this though. So we're going to right click on the pirate composition or pre-composition, and we are going to go to time and go to enable time remapping. Notice there is a time reverse layer, so if we want him to do an opposite dance, we could have him do the opposite by time reversing the layer. But first we're just going to go enable time remapping. And when we do that, we get this time remap effect that gets placed on the layer, and we get 2 keyframes. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And I'm also going to zoom in on the timeline a lot, as much as I can, pretty much. There we go. All right, because it's 17 frames, it actually fits in this very well. And so, if I go through here, this is just our keyframe, but then on this 17th frame, he disappears. And if we don't do this next step, what happens is when we do this looping that we're going to do, there would be a blank spot between each one of these loops where he disappears for 1 frame. So all we're going to do is we're going to move our playhead 1 frame ahead, and we're going to move our playhead 1 frame ahead to frame 16 instead of 17 in my case. And we're going to drop a keyframe here. And to drop a keyframe here, we can just come over here, click on the Add Remove Keyframe option. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select the keyframe after that and delete it. And now when we do this next step, it's going to loop seamlessly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to Time Remap. And in order to turn expressions on, you'll see if I hover over the stopwatch, it says Option click or Alt click if you're in Windows to add or remove expression. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt. I'm going to when I'm hovering over the stopwatch, and I'm going to click. As soon as I do that, it's going to turn this to red. That means I'm using an expression. And you'll see the current expression just says Time Remap, and it's all highlighted, which means I can type over it. So I'm just going to type loop and then capital O-U-T, and you can see it's there. I could actually just click on it here to finish it, or I could just type in opening parenthesis, closing parentheses, right? So loop out, which means that it's going to, when this first clip ends, the 17 second or 17 frames or 16 frames of animation ends, it's going to loop that over and over again until this until the pirate backdrop timeline ends. And so now to get out of that, I can just go ahead and click somewhere. You'll see that the text is here in gray, and I've got this time remap. It says expression time remap. And now if I zoom out on my timeline and I go back to this frame 0, now when I hit play, this thing just keeps looping, he keeps doing the same dance move over and over and over again. Now, if I wanted to make him have more complex dance moves, what I could do is either I could continue animating in this pirate layer and actually make this composition longer. That's going to mess up the time remapping, so you'd have to go through and basically delete the time remap and then redo those steps again with the longer composition. Or I could create an additional pirate dance composition where I could put together as many of these different dance moves as I want that I create from smaller compositions. And then I could time remap that longer composition. If, say, he does 4 different dance moves, then that could be time remapped. So it just depends on what you want to do. For this tutorial, I'm just going to finish here, and we're going to go on to copying him and creating multiple layers around here. So there's more than one pirate dancing. And so let's go ahead and do that. So we've got the key pirate in the center. And we're going to go ahead and just create a couple more pirates so that they're dancing elsewhere in the scene as well. So I'm going to go ahead and select the pirate. I'm going to go to copy and paste. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my move tool. And I'm just going to move one of these pirates over. And I don't know if these all need to be the same size, but as you'll see, both of them are going to be dancing together. And so maybe what we want to do is actually, instead of having this be start with him on the with all 3 in frame, what I want to do is maybe one pirate slides this way and one pirate slides this way, so they become 3 separate pirates. Right, so I've got one copy. I'm going to go ahead and paste another copy, so I have 3 pirate layers. And on this first pirate layer, I'm going to hit the letter P for position. I'm going to start keyframing my position, so he starts there, and then maybe at about a second out, I'm going to go ahead and put my playhead there. I'm going to drag him over to here, and then on this other pirate, which I should have selected at the same time, but that's all right. I'm going to hit the letter P to select that, turn my keyframes on back at frame 0 again, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to 1 second out, and I'm going to click and drag to, and I can hold down Shift if I want to be able to drag in a straight line. I can't, or yeah, straight line, horizontal or vertical, not a 45 though. All right, and so then I can move him over there. So now, right, as this pirate dance begins, you'll notice that even though I can keyframe the position here, right, they're still looping, right? That looping is still set, and I can now control the position. You know, if I want them to maybe scale down, I can do that as well. So let's start at this last set of keyframes at about 1 second. And just to note, there's some quick keys here. So if I hit the letter K, that basically moves me, it jumps me to whatever keyframe is next, right? And so it's not whatever keyframe in the layer I have selected, but it's whatever keyframe on the timeline, right? So if you watch this, so I'm starting here, I hit K, it jumps to this keyframe, I hit K again, and it jumps to this keyframe. And let's say I want to start doing scale for the 2 side pirates here. So I'm going to go ahead and select pirate, this top pirate, select the second pirate. I'm going to hit the letter S on the keyboard, and then so scale pops up. I'm going to turn on the keyframes for both of those. So they're at 100% here. And then a second later, somewhere right around 2, let's make them, I don't know, 30% size. Oh, that's a little bit small. Let's make them 50% size. All right, so now they're about half size to what they were, right? And so they're going backwards. And now, now that we're at this thing, let's go ahead and once they're this small, maybe we'll have them do, say, 3 rotations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the letter S to hide those scale things. I'm going to hit the letter R for rotation. I'm going to keyframe the rotation. And then maybe 2 seconds later, maybe at 4 seconds, I'm going to do the next thing. And this is where, because we're starting to animate things, I want them to do 3 full rotations in 2 seconds. And so to adjust that, I'm going to go to the 0 on this side of the X. And I'm going to go ahead and hit 3. And that should update both of those to 3 because I had both layers selected. Now, by clicking off in space, they are now deselected. All right, but so now, right, you go dance, they get smaller, they rotate around, and then they continue dancing, right? And so this is a tutorial on parenting and doing parent-child relationships, and then how to loop like an animated composition. Because a lot of times, right, especially if it's like a walk cycle or something, you don't want to animate a walk cycle for 30 seconds if your character's walking for 30 seconds. You want to animate one stride, right? And then you want to be able to loop that stride. And so hopefully all of this will be very helpful as we go forward. Now, one last thing that we could do is, because these guys go further in the background, maybe we want to, and you can see that the boat's pretty blurry back there, maybe we want to add some blur to these layers so that they look like they're getting further from the focal point of the camera, right? Even though this is like absolute ridiculousness. Let's go ahead and see if we can do that. So let's go back to where they start to get further from the camera. I'm going to pull out a little bit. Oops. And here we go. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to select these two layers. So I'm going to select those two layers, and I'm going to go to scale, and then I'm going to pull over until, all right, this is where they start decreasing in scale, is on this keyframe. All right, I want to make sure these are highlighted in blue. And then from here, what I want to do is I want to add a blur effect to these layers. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the effects and presets over here, and I'm just going to do the fast box blur. And the reason I choose that one a lot is because it is fast. It happens quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time for it to work. Gaussian blur is a little bit trickier. It's a nicer blur usually, but it takes a bit more time to process. And so this, for what I'm doing, is going to be perfectly effective. So I've added that box blur on there, and I want to go ahead and keyframe the blur radius. Now, because it's not visible here and I'd actually have to click a couple times to get down to the blur radius, I'm just going to do it here in the effect controls. Right? If effect controls didn't come up here, you can always go to window and go down to, where is it? Go down to effect controls for the pirate, and that will pop up. So I'm just going to keyframe the blur radius, and when I do that, it's going to start here. I'm going to go ahead and scroll over to here, and maybe I'll set the blur radius to 5 to start with. Let's see what that looks like. Great. So I did that, but it was only on, for some reason it's only impacting one of those layers. Oh, because I only have one selected. So I want to make sure that I go back up to this pirate layer, and you'll notice that, yeah, I did not have both of those selected. So the only way I could do that on both was if I went and pulled them down in here with both selected. So I'm going to have to do this manually by itself, which is fine. I'm going to go ahead and create a keyframe here. I do not know if I have a keyframe set on the other one. I probably don't. So yeah, this is my only keyframe. So I'm just going to set the blur radius to 5 here, and then I'm just going to go back in time to this other previous keyframe, and I'll make sure my blur radius is set to 0. Okay, so now, right, as this plays out, right, they get a little blurrier as they go into the background, right. 5 might be a little bit high in terms of the blur radius, so I'm going to come here and I'm just going to make that 3 on whichever layer I'm currently selected, and then go to the other one and make that 3 as well. Right, so they're a little bit less blurry. I could even just do 1, but right, so they get a little blurrier, and then they're spinning around and dancing in the background. All right, and if I wanted to make it look better, I could also make the ship even blurrier behind them if needed. But this is it. This is the end of the tutorial. All right, so what I would like you to do is potentially, why don't you go ahead and add some dance moves to this pirate, or create, you know, a couple different pirates that have different moves and they're doing them at the same time. And yeah, that's what I'd like to see as your continued output from this tutorial.